The kingdom of Zabanda was a land built on rhythm. The steady hum of markets, the call of drums echoing from distant hills, and the gentle murmur of the river Luma that cut through its golden plains like a living artery. The people believed the river was sacred, older than kings and wiser than any priest. It carried the voices of their ancestors, whispering blessings in the water's song. Farmers dipped their hands into it before planting their seeds, mothers sang lullabies beside its banks, and fishermen greeted its current every dawn with prayers of gratitude. As long as Luma flowed, Zabanda thrived. But one morning the rhythm broke. The river that had never stopped, not even during the driest seasons, stood still. Its glassy surface reflected a silent sky, unbroken by ripples or wind. The fishermen stood on its banks, nets in hand, waiting for the silver flicker of fish that never came. The children who once played by its edge found their laughter swallowed by the stillness. Even the birds seemed to avoid flying over it, as though the air itself had grown heavy with sorrow. At first, the villagers thought it was a passing curse, a tantrum of nature that would resolve with the dawn. They brought bowls of grain, carved gourds of honey, and beads woven from river reeds as offerings, leaving them on flat stones along the shore. But the water did not move. Its silence deepened, spreading unease through the land. Without the river's song, the crops began to wither, and the earth cracked open like broken clay. In the capital, the king of Zabanda stood upon the marble balcony of his palace, gazing toward the still river. His crown, once a symbol of prosperity, now felt like a burden upon his brow. The priests of the temple knelt before him, their voices trembling as they suggested sacrifices to appease the gods, bulls, doves, incense, even gold dust scattered across the river's surface. None of it worked. The river remained unmoved, as though it had turned its face away from the kingdom it once blessed. Whispers began to stir among the people. Some said the river had been poisoned by greed. Others claimed the gods had abandoned Zabanda for its arrogance. Yet the oldest among them, those whose hair had turned as white as river foam, exchanged uneasy glances. They remembered something the young did not, a night not long ago when smoke rose from the central square, and a woman's scream pierced the heavens. That night had been one of fire and judgment. The court had gathered, torches blazing, as a young woman was condemned. The charges had been read aloud by trembling lips: witchcraft, rebellion, speaking to the spirits. Her name had been erased from the scrolls the moment the flames consumed her body. The king himself had turned away, refusing to look. When her ashes cooled, they were gathered in a clay urn and carried beyond the city walls. There they were poured into the river Luma, the final act of erasure. Now that same river refused to move. Days passed into weeks, and despair grew heavy over Zabanda like a shroud. Markets emptied, drums fell silent, and even the palace musicians found no tune that could soothe the unease. At night, the people claimed to hear faint sounds from the river, not the gurgle of water but whispers, low and mournful, like the weeping of someone unseen. One dawn, when mist still clung to the riverbanks, an old priestess emerged from the shadows. Her back was bent with age, her hands veined and dark, her eyes reflecting the sorrow of generations. She walked to the river's edge, her bare feet sinking into the cold mud, and she gazed upon the motionless water. Behind her, a crowd had gathered, silent, hopeful, fearful. The king himself stepped forward, draped in mourning robes instead of his royal finery. "Mother," he said, his voice breaking the long silence, "you have served the temple longer than any soul alive. Tell me, why has the river turned its face from us?" The old woman did not bow. She dipped her hand into the still water, and it came up dry, as though the river refused to touch her. Her lips trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of words long buried. "The river remembers what men forget," she whispered. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where smoke once rose from a pyre that should never have been lit. "You fed it the ashes of innocence and called it justice. But the river weeps, my king. It weeps for the one they burned." The crowd gasped, their eyes darting between the priestess and the river, which shimmered faintly under the morning light. Somewhere deep beneath the surface, a pulse of gold flickered, as though something ancient had stirred in its depths, something not yet ready to forgive. And from that moment on, no one in Zabanda dared speak too loudly near the river Luma. For they feared the river might listen, and remember. Amara was a child of the river before she was a child of any kingdom. She had been found as a baby in a reed basket drifting along the river Luma's edge, her cries mingling with the whisper of the water. The fisherman who discovered her had carried her to the palace, where the aging king of Zabanda saw it as a sign from the gods, a gift from the river itself. He adopted her, naming her Amara, meaning the Eternal One. From that day on, her life and the river's song were forever intertwined. As Amara grew, the people of Zabanda came to adore her. She was not like those who ruled from stone halls or golden thrones. She spent her days barefoot among the reeds, her laughter ringing like wind chimes over the water. Her hands were gentle and sure, mending the wings of fallen birds, washing the wounds of stray dogs, and freeing fish tangled in nets. When fishermen brought their catch to the market, Amara would slip away and whisper blessings into the river, thanking it for its generosity before releasing one fish back into the current. The villagers said that wherever her feet touched the earth, lilies bloomed, and the water seemed to shimmer brighter. But where love gathers, envy soon follows. The king's new wife, Queen Noro, watched Amara with eyes as sharp as a hawk's. Noro was beautiful, her hair shining like obsidian and her robes woven from imported silks, but her heart was cold as winter stone. She had long craved the admiration of the people, yet no matter how grand her jewels, their loyalty always drifted toward the river girl with the humble smile. Servants spoke of Amara's kindness in hushed tones, merchants blessed her name before opening their shops, and children left flowers at her cottage door. Each whisper of affection was a thorn in Noro's pride. She began to see Amara not as a daughter of the kingdom but as a rival, a girl whose light dimmed her own. The tension deepened during the Festival of Currents, a sacred day when the river Luma was honored for its life-giving spirit. On that morning the air was alive with color. Banners of indigo and gold fluttered above the crowd, drums echoed from the hills, and the smell of sweet oil and roasted maize filled the streets. The people gathered along the riverbanks, their voices rising in songs older than memory. Amara arrived dressed simply in white, her hair crowned with woven reeds and wildflowers. When she stepped forward to make her offering, a bowl carved from stone filled with honey and river lilies, the water began to ripple though no wind blew. A hush fell over the gathering. The surface of the river shimmered like glass touched by starlight, and from its depths came a sound, soft, melodic, and ancient. The water began to rise, forming gentle spirals around Amara's hands. Then a voice, neither male nor female but echoing like many voices in one, spoke from the heart of the river. She is the one with the flowing soul, blessed of the current, chosen by the eternal waters. The crowd gasped and the priests fell to their knees. Even the king, his eyes wide with awe, took a step forward as the water gently lapped against his feet. Amara bowed low, trembling but unafraid as the river's glow faded back into calm. When she turned to face the people, her eyes seemed to hold the reflection of the flowing water itself, deep, clear, and endless. The villagers erupted into joyful song. They threw flowers into the river, chanting her name, Amara, Amara of the flowing soul. And some even knelt, calling her the river's daughter. But high on the marble balcony of the palace, Queen Noro's expression remained still. Beneath her jeweled headdress, her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. That night, as the sounds of celebration drifted through the city, Noro sat alone in her chamber, staring into her mirror. The torches flickered around her, their light warping her reflection until it seemed to twist into the face of someone she did not recognize, someone older, harsher. She imagined the people's cheers, their eyes shining with love not for her, but for the river girl who had stolen their hearts. Her maid approached quietly, carrying a silver tray of fruit. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "the people say the river has chosen her. They call her blessed." Noro turned slowly, her voice low and smooth as poison. "Blessed?" she repeated. "The river does not choose. It remembers." She rose from her seat, walking to the window that overlooked the moonlit river. "And it remembers too much." That night, while the kingdom slept, Queen Noro summoned her most trusted advisor, a man with knowledge of forbidden rites, one who had once been cast out of the temple for whispering to shadows. "I want the river's song silenced," she said, "and the girl who carries it, gone." The man bowed low. "As you wish, my queen," he said, his smile thin and cold. And as the moon dipped below the horizon, the first whispers of Amara's doom began to ripple through the water, faint, like the tremor before a storm. "You said." Dawn broke over Zabanda, but it was a hollow dawn. A silence hung over the palace like mist. The river Luma, once the singing heart of the kingdom, had grown eerily still. No ripples danced across its surface, no fish leapt to catch the morning sun. Even the reeds along its banks drooped as if in mourning. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, wondering what curse had befallen their land. Queen Noro stood at the palace balcony, her silk robes catching the cold light. She watched the river's frozen calm with hidden satisfaction. To her, the silence was not grief, it was opportunity. By noon the royal square filled with whispers. The queen descended the palace steps, flanked by guards and priests, her face pale and solemn. The people parted for her, bowing low, though unease shadowed every eye. She carried in her hand a clay jar filled with water from the river, now motionless and dull. She lifted it before the crowd. "The river Luma has turned its face from us," she declared, her voice ringing sharp as a blade. "The fish refuse to swim, the crops wither, and the wind carries no blessing. Our ancestors' voices have gone silent." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the gathered faces. "And I know why." A murmur ran through the crowd. "The river has been bewitched," Noro continued, her tone dripping with sorrow. "Its spirit corrupted by the hand of one who sought too much favor, too much light. A girl whose heart turned against the gods who blessed her." Gasps rose. Noro's eyes narrowed as she pointed toward the crowd, and from between the villagers, Amara was dragged forward by soldiers, her white dress torn, her wrists bound in rough rope. Her hair hung loose over her face, streaked with dirt and tears. The villagers recoiled, disbelief etched into their features. "Amara?" cried an old fisherman. "No, not the river's daughter. She healed my son when no healer could," said another. But Noro raised her hand for silence. "Do not be fooled by her gentleness," she said. "She wears the face of purity, but behind it lies ambition. She sought to command the river's voice, to twist its spirit to her will. The still waters are her doing." Amara's voice trembled as she tried to speak. "That's not true. I would never harm the river. It's my home, my soul." "Silence," barked one of the priests, stepping forward. "We saw her near the banks the night before the river stilled. Her hands glowed red, the sign of forbidden craft." The villagers gasped again, fear replacing doubt. Superstition clung to their hearts like smoke. Even those who had once loved her dared not meet her eyes. Amara turned desperately toward the king, her father. He sat upon the high platform, his crown heavy, his face shadowed with confusion. His once bright eyes were now dulled by potions whispered into his wine, poison of the queen's making. "Father," Amara cried, falling to her knees. "You know me. You found me in the river, it blessed us both. Please, I beg you, do not believe these lies." The king flinched, clutching his chest. His voice came weak and uncertain. "The priests, they say the river is angry. That a sacrifice must cleanse it." "A sacrifice?" Amara whispered. "You would burn your daughter for the river that raised me?" Noro stepped closer, resting a false sympathetic hand on the king's shoulder. "My love, the land dies while she lives. The ancestors demand justice. Only the purging fire can restore balance." Amara looked around, but all she saw were lowered heads. The people she had healed, fed, and blessed now stood silent, afraid. Her heart broke with every breath. The guards seized her arms. She did not fight, she knew the river was watching. They led her through the village square as drums beat slowly, like the thudding of a heart. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts, eyes wide with fear. Some threw flowers, others stones. The pyre was built high, dry wood piled in a cruel tower. At its center stood the stake, its rope bindings waiting like open arms. As they tied her to the post, Amara looked toward the horizon where the river glimmered faintly in the sun. She took a deep breath and her voice, clear and soft, rose above the murmurs. "If I have sinned, may the fire judge me. But if I am innocent, may the river remember me when they forget." The queen signaled. The torch was lit. Flames licked the wood. Smoke curled into the air, dark and heavy. The crowd watched in silence as the fire climbed higher, surrounding Amara in a halo of gold and red. For a moment her face was serene, untouched by pain. Her eyes lifted toward the sky, and the faintest smile crossed her lips. Then something strange happened. The wind stopped. The drums ceased. The flames rose taller, brighter, then burst outward in a wave of heat that sent the people stumbling back. Within the blaze her voice echoed, not in screams but in song. A low, haunting melody that sounded like flowing water. "River, remember me?" When the fire finally died, only ash remained, soft, silver-gray, glowing faintly like embers beneath the dusk. The priests gathered what was left of her and carried it to the riverbank. As the queen looked on, they poured the ashes into the still water. The surface rippled once, then froze. The river Luma, lifeblood of Zabanda, hardened like glass. No current, no sound, no reflection. The fish beneath the surface hung motionless, their scales dull, their eyes lifeless. The villagers fell to their knees in terror. "The river rejects us," someone whispered. "It will not take her." But Queen Noro only turned away, forcing calm into her trembling hands. "The curse is broken," she said to the king, though her voice betrayed unease. Behind her, the river stood silent. The moon rose, its reflection fixed upon the glassy surface like a single unblinking eye, watching, waiting. And though Amara's body was gone, her promise lingered, carried in the hush of the still air. The river remembers. Days turned to weeks, and the kingdom of Zabanda began to choke beneath its own silence. The river Luma, once a living artery that fed every field, every child, every breath of the kingdom, remained frozen in stillness. Not with ice but with deathly calm. The surface glimmered like glass, mocking the sun with its cold reflection. No rain came. The skies hung gray and heavy as if mourning. The farmers stood in their cracked fields, staring helplessly at withered crops that crumbled at their touch. The cattle bellowed weakly, their ribs showing beneath dry skin. And at the riverbanks, fishermen cast their nets again and again, only to pull them up empty, torn, tangled, or clean as though the fish had never existed. At first, the people blamed the weather, the spirits, or fate. But as days stretched into weeks, a whisper began to grow, soft at first, then louder, spreading like wildfire through the villages. The river is angry. The river remembers her. In the palace, Queen Noro knelt before the great shrine, her face hidden behind a veil of white silk. Candles surrounded her, their flames flickering low in the still air. Servants watched from the doorway, whispering. She had spent every morning here since the fire, offering prayers, sacrifices, and tears that held no truth. Her voice echoed through the empty hall. "Great river spirit," she intoned sweetly, her hands lifted. "Accept our offerings. Restore your flow. Wash away whatever curse has taken root." Her words were hollow, her heart colder than the river she claimed to mourn. Behind her mask of piety, her thoughts twisted with unease. Why had the river frozen after Amara's ashes were poured in? Why had the priest's chants failed to stir even a ripple? She dismissed the thoughts with a sharp breath and forced her trembling hands to still. "The kingdom must see me as their hope," she whispered to herself. "Not their curse." But hope had already begun to fade. In the royal courtyard, the king grew pale and frail. His once commanding voice now broke with guilt and doubt. He sat by the balcony every dawn, staring toward the motionless river, his crown tilted loosely upon his thinning hair. The echo of his daughter's last words haunted him. "River, remember me when they forget." Those words looped endlessly in his mind, searing through his sleep. He began to hear her voice in the whisper of the wind, to see her face in the wavering shadows on the walls. At night, he would wake drenched in sweat, calling her name into the silence. "Amara, child, forgive me?" Servants would find him pacing the corridors before dawn, murmuring to himself, "It wasn't her. It couldn't have been her." But the queen always silenced him with her soft, poisonous comfort. "She was consumed by envy of the gods, my love," she would whisper, stroking his trembling hands. "Her sacrifice was necessary. You did what you must for the kingdom." Yet her words no longer soothed him. The river's stillness spoke louder than her lies. Soon, the priestess of the old temple was summoned. She was ancient, her hair white as bone, her staff carved from driftwood taken from the river's edge. She walked barefoot into the throne room, her eyes clouded but bright with knowing. The court knelt in uneasy silence as she lifted her face toward the king. "You called me to speak truth," she rasped, "so I shall. The river sleeps because it mourns. The ashes you gave it do not belong to the dead but to the living." The king frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "The fire did not destroy her," the priestess said. "It changed her. The river will not flow until she is whole again. The spirit you burned seeks her reflection, the parts scattered to the wind, not to the water." A murmur rippled through the room. Queen Noro's knuckles tightened around her robes. "Old woman," she hissed, "you speak in riddles?" The girl was judged and purified. The river's silence is a test, not a punishment. But the priestess turned her blind eyes toward the queen. "You can fool men but not water," she said coldly. "The river knows what it drinks." The queen's face froze, but her mask of calm returned within seconds. "Enough," she said, dismissing her with a wave. "The priestess grows senile with age." The old woman bowed low. "Age may dull my eyes but not my hearing. And the river's voice is clear, it does not forgive false prayers." That night the kingdom trembled. Thunder rumbled across the hills, but no rain followed. The air grew heavy and humid, and the scent of ash still lingered. Children who played near the river's edge came running home, their faces pale with fright. "We saw her," they cried. We saw the girl in the water. Their mothers tried to hush them, but the story spread, of glowing shapes beneath the frozen surface. When the moon rose, the people gathered by the riverbank with torches in hand, peering into the motionless depths. At first they saw nothing. Just their reflections staring back. Then slowly a shimmer. A faint pulse of light moved beneath the glassy surface, soft, fluid, and alive. Fish, translucent as crystal, drifted upward. Their scales gleamed faintly, glowing like embers underwater. The villagers gasped. The fish moved together in a swirling pattern, and soon, a face began to form, delicate, sorrowful, radiant. Amara's face. Her eyes were closed, her hair flowing like river weed, her features serene yet full of grief. The glow of the fish intensified, and a sound, faint, melodic, almost like a hum, rippled through the air. It was not water moving but something deeper, older. A woman knelt on the bank and whispered, "She's still here." The king, standing on the balcony, saw the glow from afar. Tears filled his eyes as the image of his daughter shimmered against the still water. His voice cracked in the night. "Amara, forgive your father." The river did not move. But the faintest ripple brushed the edge of his reflection, as if a hand had touched the surface from beneath. Queen Noro watched from the shadows of the balcony, her hands shaking. She saw the glowing fish, the forming face, the soft glimmer of eyes that once looked at her with kindness. For the first time the queen's breath faltered. Because deep beneath the river's glass-like surface, Amara's ashes had begun to gather, swirling, glowing, taking shape once more. And though no one yet dared to say it aloud, the kingdom knew. The river had not refused the ashes. It was waiting. Night after night, Tay woke trembling, the echo of her voice clinging to his mind like mist. In his dreams, Amara stood knee-deep in the river Luma, her body made of light and flowing water. Her eyes shimmered with sadness and strength, and her lips whispered the same words each time, "Gather what they scattered." Every time she spoke, ripples formed around her, and then everything dissolved into darkness. At first, Tay thought these dreams were born of grief. Amara had been kind to him when no one else had. She used to mend his torn clothes and share bread when he had nothing. He remembered sitting by her hut, listening to her hum river songs that made even the wind stop to listen. When she died, the songs stopped too and the river turned to glass. Now the silence was unbearable. One dawn he woke with his palms caked in wet mud. His bed was clean when he slept, but somehow he had touched the earth in his sleep. The next night the same thing happened. By the third night, he found streaks of fine gray ash beneath his nails, ash that shimmered faintly when the moonlight struck it. He realized it was her. Her ashes. The ones they had scattered to the wind. He began wandering the edges of Zabanda, searching. The villagers mocked him. "The river took her, boy. You can't bring back the dead," they laughed. But he didn't stop. Something deep inside urged him on, a heartbeat that wasn't his. It was as though the river itself guided his steps. He would kneel beside tree roots, scoop up dirt, and sometimes, a tiny whiff of gray ash appeared, lighter than dust, glowing faintly before vanishing into his hands. Every time he found one, he placed it into a small clay jar he carried around his neck. Days bled into weeks. The boy walked barefoot through dry farmlands and hollow villages. He climbed hills that once echoed with laughter but now held only silence. Yet, something miraculous began to happen. Wherever Tay found a fragment of Amara's ashes, a drop of water stirred nearby. A single tear of the river breaking free. Once, when he found a streak of ash beneath a rock, a stream bubbled beside him as though the earth had sighed with relief. One night, Tay followed a dream into the forest. The moonlight led him to an old fig tree by a dry pond. He dug at the base of its roots, his fingers bleeding. There, mixed with soil and bone fragments, was another piece of her, a larger one, glowing blue like a trapped soul. The moment he lifted it, the tree shuddered, and dew began to fall from its leaves for the first time in years. The boy wept. Word of him spread through the villages. Some began to follow him from afar, whispering prayers. The priestess herself appeared one evening, her old eyes gleaming with recognition. "The river chose you," she said. "She remembers who loved her." She taught him to keep the ashes in sacred clay, each jar sealed with water from the river's edge, the little that still remained liquid under the ice-like crust. Tay continued his journey to the mountain caves, where the wind had carried the last of Amara's remains. Inside the caves he heard her voice more clearly than ever. "You are the hands I could not keep," she whispered. "Each piece you find frees a current." And it was true. As he left the cave carrying the final handful of glowing ash, he looked down into the valley. Thin streams of water began to move again, slithering through the cracks of dry soil, shimmering under the sun like silver veins. For the first time in many moons, the river made a sound, faint like a sigh, but alive. The fish that had vanished began flickering beneath the surface, hesitant yet hopeful. The people of Zabanda fell to their knees by the banks, watching the boy return with his jars full of what they thought was lost forever. He stood at the water's edge holding the jars to his chest. "I've gathered what they scattered," he whispered. The surface of the river rippled in response, a pulse like a heartbeat, as if Amara herself had heard him. And far beneath the water, glowing fish swam in circles, forming her shape once more, waiting for the day she would be whole again. The rumor spread through Zabanda like wildfire carried by ghosts, whispers that Amara's spirit had returned with the river's breath. Villagers began leaving flowers by the banks at dusk, murmuring prayers they once offered to the dead. The air, once dry and still, now shimmered faintly at night, and the water, though not fully flowing, pulsed with light as if dreaming of motion. Inside the palace, Queen Noro sat before her mirror, staring into a face that no longer belonged to her. Her beauty, once praised throughout the land, had begun to fade. Fine cracks webbed across her reflection like fissures in dry earth. No matter how much kohl she lined her eyes with or how much oil she rubbed into her skin, the cracks remained. And when she blinked, the reflection blinked slower, as though the woman in the mirror was something else entirely. At night she could no longer sleep. The once comforting sound of silence had turned into torment. From the window of her chamber, she would hear faint splashes in the still river, rhythmic, deliberate, as though invisible hands were stirring it. Sometimes she heard soft humming, a tune she knew well but hadn't heard since the day of the burning. It was Amara's river song, the one the girl sang while washing herbs by the water. The queen would rise from her bed, trembling, clutching her robe. "It's the wind," she whispered to herself. But then the air would shift, carrying words through her curtains. "The river remembers." Panic began to rot her composure. She summoned the palace guards. "Find the boy," she hissed, her voice sharp as splintered glass. "The one they call Te. Bring me his head and scatter it into the river so he may join his precious witch." The guards bowed, though unease clouded their eyes. They had heard the same whispers. They knew of the fishermen who vanished when they tried to cross the glowing waters. But orders were orders. That night, they set out, spears glinting under a pale moon, and marched toward the riverbank where Te often prayed. The boy saw them coming but did not run. He stood barefoot at the edge, holding his jars close, the faint blue light of Amara's ashes glowing within. "If the river wants me," he said softly, "then let her take me." The guards surrounded him. The first stepped forward, and the water behind the boy erupted. A wave rose, shimmering gold and blue, swallowing the man whole before he could scream. The others tried to retreat, but their feet sank into the wet ground as glowing tendrils of water coiled around their legs, pulling them into the depths. In moments, the river fell silent again. Only Te remained untouched, his eyes glowing faintly with the same light as the water. When the soldiers did not return, Queen Noro's fear became poison. She paced the throne room like a trapped lioness, her nails clawing at her palms. The king, pale and weary, asked what troubled her, but she only snapped, "The dead do not return. The river lies." But the truth seeped through the palace walls. Servants whispered that at night, the sound of dripping water echoed through the hallways even though the river still slept. One maid swore she saw wet footprints leading from the queen's chamber to the throne room, each glowing faintly before fading away. Then came the priestess. She appeared in the queen's court unannounced, her frail body cloaked in tattered white, her staff made of river reeds. The guards tried to stop her, but her voice froze them in place. "You seek to drown the river's will, Noro," she said. "But you cannot drown what remembers. The water forgets nothing, not your envy, not your fire, not her name." Queen Noro's breath caught. "You dare speak to your queen this way?" she snarled. The priestess raised her staff. "I speak to the woman who burned innocence and fed her ashes to memory. You lit the pyre, but the river was watching. And now it mourns not her death, but your soul's decay." The queen's laughter cracked like broken glass. "You speak of ghosts and water. You're mad." "Perhaps," the priestess said softly. "But the river's madness has begun to flow in you." That night, Noro locked herself in her chamber. She ordered every mirror covered, but it made no difference. When she turned her head, she still saw her reflection moving in places where it shouldn't, on polished floors, on the surface of her drinking cup, in the glint of her jewels. And every reflection whispered the same word, "Murderer." Her dreams turned feverish. She saw Amara walking through fire without burning, her hair made of river currents, her eyes shimmering like fish scales. "Why do you hide?" Amara asked her. "The river knows." Noro woke screaming, her sheets damp with cold sweat. The river's glow through her window seemed brighter now, almost alive. She stumbled toward it, pressing her palms against the glass. The water, though distant, appeared to look back at her, its faint ripples forming Amara's face. She fell to her knees, whispering, "What do you want from me?" The reflection smiled sadly. "To be whole again." From that night onward, the queen refused to drink water. Servants said she feared that every drop might carry Amara's memory, that each sip would whisper her crime inside her veins. Her once commanding voice became fragile, her steps uncertain. Even the king began to look at her differently, as though seeing through the mask she'd worn for years. And as the days passed, the cracks in her mirror spread wider. One morning, when she dared to look again, her reflection did not move at all. It only smiled, Amara's smile, and whispered through the glass, "The river remembers." Queen Noro's scream echoed through the palace and out to the still waters, where the fish stirred restlessly, waiting for the rest of Amara to rise. "You said." Tay's feet bled by the time he reached the northern cliffs. 4 days he had followed the river's silent course, carrying jars of Amara's ashes wrapped in cloth. The path was treacherous, jagged rocks, thorny vines, and winds that howled as though warning him to turn back. Yet with each step, he felt the faint pull of something calling him forward, a song humming beneath the earth, the same melody Amara once sang by the riverbanks. The kingdom of Zabanda had grown ghostly behind him. Fields had dried to dust. Fishermen's nets hung useless from poles. The people whispered prayers at empty altars, and the king no longer left his chamber. But Tay did not look back. He knew what he had to do. The river had chosen him. The dreams had shown him the way, to the Cave of Whispers, the hidden place where the river Luma was born. The climb up the cliffs was brutal. Every ledge cut into his hands, every gust of wind tried to throw him off balance. But when he reached the summit, he saw it, a vast opening in the mountain's heart, glowing faintly blue. The air there was thick with mist, humming softly, like breath held for centuries. He stepped inside. The walls were alive. They pulsed faintly, veins of light running through the stone. The deeper he walked, the louder the whispers became, not of words but of memories. He could hear laughter, cries, songs, echoes of everyone who had ever touched the river. The sound grew stronger until it felt like the cave itself was speaking. "Tay." The voice was soft, fluid, echoing from everywhere at once. He stopped, clutching the cloth of ashes to his chest. "Amara?" he whispered. The light within the cave brightened. Water trickled down the walls, forming patterns, faces, hands, a flowing figure made of mist and current. "You gathered what they scattered," the voice said gently. "The river kept its promise." Tay fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "They burned you," he said trembling. "They poured your ashes into the water. But the river never forgot." The ground began to tremble. The trickle of water turned to a rush, pouring from cracks and filling the cavern floor. The ashes in Tay's hands glowed brighter than ever, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He stood lifting them high. "This is all that remains," he whispered. "All that I found." The cave shuddered. A great breath seemed to move through it, as though the mountain itself exhaled. Then slowly Tay opened his hands. The ashes scattered into the air, spiraling upward like glowing dust. The mist thickened, spinning faster and faster until a shape began to form, tall, graceful, radiant. Amara emerged. Her body shimmered with flowing light, her skin translucent like water under the moon. Her hair cascaded in waves of silver-blue mist, and her eyes, those gentle, knowing eyes, held both sorrow and peace. She looked upon the boy who had remembered her, her expression softening. "You came," she said. Tay could hardly breathe. "The river showed me the way," he whispered. She smiled, that same calm, patient smile she had worn by the riverbank. She stepped forward, her bare feet rippling the water beneath her. Reaching out, she placed her cool hand on his cheek. "The river kept my promise," she said softly. "It remembered me even when the world forgot." As her touch met his skin, warmth flooded through Tay's body. He felt his heart sink with the rhythm of the river. Visions flashed before his eyes, Amara singing with children, the queen's lies, the fire consuming innocence, the ashes swirling into the current. Then a final vision, the river, alive again, racing toward the sea with purpose. The cave grew brighter. Streams burst from every direction, cascading down the walls in glowing torrents. The ground beneath them cracked open, and water surged upward like a living creature set free. The sound was thunderous, triumphant, the heartbeat of the land awakening after a long sleep. Tay stumbled back, shielding his eyes. When he looked again, Amara was no longer made of light alone. She was flesh and form, human, whole, radiant. The fire that once took her had returned her remade. She stepped onto solid ground, her feet leaving ripples of light with every step. Behind her, the newborn river roared to life, spilling out of the cave's mouth and rushing down the cliffs in a torrent of silver. The air outside responded. Clouds gathered for the first time in months, heavy with long-awaited rain. The fish, gone for so long, shimmered beneath the waves, leaping as though in celebration. The water twisted and danced, forming patterns that bowed in Amara's direction. Tay watched, awestruck, as the river spread its light across the horizon. "You're alive," he breathed. Amara turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly like the moon on the water. "Alive is a small word," she said. "The river remembers what was broken, and through memory, it restores. Every stone, every drop, every heart, all are bound by flow." The rain began to fall, gentle at first, then steady, washing away the dust from the earth. In the villages below, people ran to the riverbanks, crying with joy as they saw the current rushing again, fish gliding beneath the surface. The fields drank greedily, the air filled with the scent of life returning. Back in the cave, Amara looked down at Tay. "You carried my ashes, little one," she said. "But more than that, you carried remembrance. The river flows because of you." Tay's voice trembled. "What will you do now?" She smiled faintly, her gaze drifting toward the roaring water. "There is still one truth left to carve," she said. "One name the river must speak before it can rest." And with that, she stepped forward into the sunlight, her form shimmering brighter with each stride. The river followed her like a loyal spirit, its waves bowing as she passed. As Amara reached the foot of the mountain, the people saw her, not as a ghost but as the river itself reborn. They fell to their knees, whispering her name. And beneath the rushing current, the fish danced, silver, bright, alive, for the first time since her death. The river had remembered. And so life began again. The palace of Zabanda stood silent that evening, wrapped in the heavy stillness that comes before a storm. Guards stood by the gates, their spears trembling though no wind blew. Inside the grand hall, torches flickered weakly, their flames bending, bowing as if to something unseen. Then came the sound, the faint trickle of water, echoing through marble corridors that had long been dry. The scent of rain filled the air. Amara walked through the gates. Her steps were slow, steady, and every footprint she left shimmered with rippling water that spread like veins through the floor. The guards fell back, unable to move, as if an unseen force held them. The queen, seated upon the golden throne, froze at the sight. For a heartbeat, her mind refused to understand what her eyes beheld. The girl she had burned, the ashes she had scattered into the river now stood whole before her, radiant and alive. Her voice broke through the silence like a cracked reed. "No," she whispered, her words trembling. "It cannot be. I saw you burn." Amara's eyes glowed with the calm of deep water. "You saw fire," she said softly, her voice echoing in every corner of the hall. "But you never looked into the river." The courtiers who had gathered began to murmur, confusion and fear spreading among them. The torches sputtered and died one by one, replaced by soft blue light spilling from Amara's form. The sound of rushing water filled the hall as the river Luma's spirit, unseen but felt, swept through the chamber. Curtains billowed without wind, the air alive with whispering voices. The river had entered the palace. The queen stood, her face pale and drawn. "Guards!" she screamed, though none moved. Their armor glistened wet, droplets forming from nowhere. "Seize her. She is no spirit, she is a curse." Amara raised her hand and silence fell. The river's voice spoke through her, low and vast, a language older than any spoken by humankind. Water surged across the marble floor, coiling like a serpent around the queen's feet. It wasn't violent, it was deliberate, patient, the way justice moves when it has waited too long. The courtiers backed away, gasping as the water began to carve words into the shining floor, glowing letters that seemed alive. "Truth returns." The king entered at that moment, his robe drenched as though he had walked through a storm. His eyes widened when he saw Amara, the daughter of the river, the one he had condemned. "By the gods," he breathed, his knees nearly buckling. "Amara?" She turned toward him, her expression neither angry nor kind, only vast like the river itself. "Your hands are clean, but your heart carried her fire," she said. "You let their lies drown truth. Even kings must answer to water." The king sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I was blind," he whispered. "I trusted poison over innocence. Forgive me." Amara's gaze softened, but she did not answer. The river would decide. The queen screamed again, backing away as the water rose higher around her. "No. I am queen. I am the keeper of the flame. You will not take me." She stumbled up the steps of the throne, her jeweled crown slipping from her head, clattering across the floor. But the water followed. It reached her ankles, her knees, her waist, not burning, not drowning, simply washing, purifying. She tried to strike it away, clawing at the air, but every movement made her weaker. The ripples shimmered gold, then white, then turned her flesh to pale dust. Her cries broke into silence as her body dissolved, not into water but into fine grains of sand. A soft wind stirred through the hall, carrying her remains away, scattering them through the open windows like a forgotten echo. The hall glowed brighter, every wall glistening with a thin sheen of water. The throne, once gold, now reflected the river's surface, shimmering with memories of both mercy and justice. Amara looked down at the king, still kneeling in tears. She stepped closer, her voice low but resonant. "The river remembers not to punish," she said. "It remembers so the land may heal. Do not let forgetting rule again." He nodded, trembling, pressing his forehead to the wet marble. "You have my word. Never again." Amara turned away, walking toward the great doors of the palace. Behind her, every step she took sent ripples of light across the floor, washing away centuries of deceit. As she crossed the threshold, the river's song followed, low, eternal, filled with both sorrow and peace. Outside, the rain began to fall. The courtiers rushed to the windows, watching as the river Luma swelled and sparkled, alive once more. Fish leapt beneath the surface in silver arcs, and the people gathered on the banks knelt, whispering her name. Amara paused at the gates, her hair glistening with droplets of living light. She looked back one last time at the kingdom she had once called home. Then, with a single step, she vanished into the mist, her form dissolving into the gentle waves that flowed around her feet. The queen was gone. The river had spoken. And in its voice, the kingdom heard truth, not as a wound, but as cleansing water that would never again be silenced. The sun rose gently over Zabanda, bathing the river in gold. The people gathered along its banks, their eyes reflecting the calm waves that had once raged with grief. The river flowed fuller than it ever had, its current alive with whispers and laughter. Fish glimmered beneath the surface, each bearing a silvery mark shaped like a hand, Amara's touch made eternal in the living water. Elders said it was her way of watching over them, ensuring that no one forgot what cruelty had cost and what love had restored. The villagers rebuilt the shrines that once honored forgotten gods and instead raised them for her. The river maiden, the keeper of truth, the one who returned. Offerings of flowers, carved stones, and song filled the banks each morning. Women sang her name as they fetched water. Men bowed their heads before setting nets into the flow. Even the children, who had never known her in life, grew up learning her story, not from books or priests but from the voice of the river itself. They said, when the wind blew over the water at dusk, it carried her voice, soft, patient, eternal. She spoke of forgiveness and of remembrance, of how the river carries both pain and healing in the same current. The people listened and lived gentler lives because of it. No one dared to take from the river without gratitude, for they knew it remembered everything, every act of kindness, every wound of betrayal. In the palace that once echoed with screams, quiet now ruled. King Edu, broken by guilt yet touched by the mercy Amara had shown, turned his rule toward wisdom. He rebuilt the villages, opened the granaries to the poor, and decreed a festival each year in her honor, the Day of Flow, when the people danced by the river and poured petals into the current as offerings. Each flower was said to carry a prayer, and each prayer was answered with the gentle ripple of the waves. As years passed, Amara's spirit became more than memory, she became rhythm. When rain fell, the people said it was her laughter. When storms rose, they whispered it was her anger awakening against injustice. The priestess who once warned the queen often stood by the river at dawn, smiling at the mist that gathered like a woman's silhouette above the surface. "She guards us still," she would say, and no one doubted her words. The tale spread beyond Zabanda, carried by travelers who drank from its sacred waters. Other kingdoms sent envoys to see the river that never sleeps, amazed by its purity and endless motion. Some tried to capture its power, but they returned with trembling hearts, swearing that the water spoke their names and showed them their sins. The river was alive, yes, but it was also watchful. It gave freely, yet demanded truth in return. And deep beneath its shimmering surface, where light met shadow, Amara's spirit flowed, neither bound by death nor distance. She moved with the current, her essence woven into every droplet, her laughter echoing in every rush of tide. She had become the river, and the river had become her, whole, eternal, unbroken. When mothers told their children the old story, they ended it the same way every time. They poured her ashes in the river, but the river poured her name into eternity. And as those words were spoken, the river would gleam just a little brighter, as though smiling, remembering the girl who turned her own sorrow into salvation, and ensuring that the waters of Zabanda would never stop flowing again.